Welcome, good morning, and welcome to the four pillars of self mastery, levers and drivers. What I mean by levers and drivers, these are the things that we can do to actually execute on the four pillars. So, knowledge is one thing, but we have to actually make it live. We're going to go from knowledge to skill to execution or performance. And that's what the levers and drivers come in. Now, this is more of a coaching model, but you'll be able to apply some of the things we talk about. Recognize that I have dozens and dozens of levers and drivers for each of the pillars. You don't need all of them to make it work. You just need a couple of strategies, two or three strategies and tactics that work on a bad day of a bad week for you and that they're reliable. So I can get you started, and that's what we'll talk about today. Now, to make this actionable and to put it in perspective, so this is foundational for dynamic leadership. Dynamic leadership is very much just like it says, it's looking at the situation and adjusting real time on the fly with best practices, and the objective is to stay in intrinsic motivation. Think about it as keeping your team in the flow state. If you push too far, they get overwhelmed or stressed and they come out of the flow state. If it's not intense enough, they drop below the flow state and they get bored. So dynamic leadership is a way to keep them in that flow state, because in the flow state, you're going to have natural intrinsic motivation, even though what they're working on may not have anything to any direct interest to them. Part of the process is on your onboarding. You understand what their purpose is, what's important to them. And when you organize the work, you're organizing the work with that in mind. So even if there's only a 10% overlap with the work they're doing and uh, their interests, you're going to start tapping into the intrinsic motivation. Now, the to make this practical, I decided to use, for the U.S. anyway, and in fact, we're seeing protests going on in other countries as well. But I decided to use the current some current events, not specifically, but more broadly, the stress that people are feeling. So if you look at social media, first of all, there's a ton of bots out there. I mean, so many bots, and it makes it feel like there are more people who disagree with you than in actuality. As a matter of fact, if you look at social media and then you go out specifically, especially if you live in a city, you can do this specifically, looking to see how many people you're even aware of some of the stuff going on in social media. They're not aware of it. So many people just push politics off to the side, because you go up, you go down, you go up, you go down. It reverts to the mean, and you end up with the normal path, the reversion to the mean. And I say that's still in play, but because of the way the bots are coming in and the way the term flooding the zone, the objective would be to overwhelm people to get them into fight or flight. So then all you have to do is keep pushing those buttons, and you're keeping people in a fight or flight frenzied state. And in a frenzied state, you're not going to be effective, because in that fight or flight, your options close down, your vision closes down, and you see fewer options, and you go even more so into kind of a fear-based thought process. Now, with that in mind, what we want to do is maintain agency. It wouldn't matter to me if this stuff was really going on, because the strategy is the same. Focus on what I can control, focus on what I can influence, make sure I'm following principles, and the chips are going to fall where they may. So every day you get up, you reset, and you adjust based on the results you're getting. But in this context, because there's so many bots pushing a false narrative, and there's also this idea of flooding the zone to keep people in a state of feeling like they're out of control, a state of panic, a state of constant threat, people aren't able to access their agency. And my models are all about agency, which we'll talk about. So that's the sort of the backdrop. Now, what I'll do is I'll use a combination of slides and also uh, some graphics or some illustration on a pad. You see on the bottom there, it says join the conversation. If you click that link, you'll be able to join the conversation. And that's the same link every day that I go live. So I go live most days on weekdays, Monday to Friday. Most It's a mix of 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, but I put the timing on there the day before. The reason I use 7 o'clock is because I am involved in some other activities, and 7 o'clock sometimes works better. but also I'm involved in research and getting prepared for these. So sometimes I like 8 o'clock, more than you needed to know. Now, but I do invite you to join the conversation because you can come on stage and then we can have a real conversation. Because the more I can talk about this in real life terms, the less it feels like theory and the more easily it's adopted because people can see their own situation in some of the conversations that come up. You can also put comments in the chat box, but I'm on multiple platforms and I don't always see comments that come in from certain platforms. If you're watching this as a recording of it, then just understand that you can go to 7stepreset.com/live and you'll get information about what platforms I'm on. I also update the schedule there on a daily basis so you can see when the next event's going to be. That way you can kind of plan your time and join in and have your questions and we could talk about real world stuff. Now, the first thing I did, I'm just going to kind of recap what I've talked about this week because all week has been the same thing, the levers and drivers to command the pillars, the 4 pillars of habit mastery, of self mastery. And those 4 pillars, you have to have knowledge, you have to have enough understanding to have the context to do the thing that we're talking about. Then I go to habit mastery, and I go to habit mastery second, and state mastery third. And the reason it's in that order is because you first have to recognize that, oh, I can change habits. See, up until 1990, late 90s, it was believed that we're hardwired, that we can't change, that our personality is what we have to live with for the rest of our lives. You can't change your intelligence. All this was thought to be hardwired because the neuroscience research had not gotten out yet that showed that this is not, the subconscious is not a mind. There's 95% of habit, living by habit, is not on the mind side. It's actually on the network of neurons side. And there's a bright line, a definite distinction between the network of neurons and the conscious mind. And most people don't even feel that, but it's what makes people think that personality is just what it is. They just think they don't recognize that personality is actually a set of habits. You may think it intellectually, but we approach it when we try to change it. We try to change personality and identity and things like that. People tend to try to change it at the construct or the summary level rather than looking at the elements. So there's 3 kinds of habits. There's behavioral habits, which most people have at least some handle on and can navigate. And then there's the reactive habits. And these are the ones that mostly get in the way because it's the ones that can close doors that you wanted to go through. The reason being is like you're losing control, you're being triggered. So, reactive habits, and triggered is maybe an extreme, but you can have a reactive habit of just telling tension. A simple thing that somebody's explaining something to you and you're supposed to be listening and understanding, but they hit a nerve, and next thing you know, you're into telling tension. Well, that's a reactive habit. You can change that. You don't have to live with that. There's a way to change that habit. So that would be a reactive habit. And then you have the identity type habits. And that's what I'm talking about at the summary level. So personality is a set of elements, but it's still habitual. And the way to change your personality is not by changing your personality, it's by changing the elements that make up your personality. And that's why we don't have to live with who we are today. The brain we were born with is not the brain that we have to die with. We can change it, and that's the process of neuroplasticity. You can look that term up. You can look up deep practice. You can look up myelin. You can look up synapsis and synaptogenesis, and you'll find so much content around those topics that corroborate what I'm saying. You don't have to take my word for it. Do your own research. Go down a few rabbit holes because each one of those words you search on myelin, synapsis, synaptogenesis, deep practice, neuroplasticity, you will be able to go down a rabbit hole and you can go until your heart's desire. But you'll find the same stuff that I'm talking about here. So the first thing I want to do is kind of reset, or yeah, I'll reset what we're talking about. And to do that, before jumping into the review, I want to point out that I I highly recommend having some kind of a backdrop. And when I say backdrop, what I mean is, what's your model of the world? What's your model of the future? Where do you think things are going? Because if you don't have some kind of what ground zero looks like, some kind of a set point that no matter what happens, you're coming back here. So this is on a daily basis. Instead of getting on the roller coaster and thinking that that's what life is, coming down the hill on the roller coaster, you're going to get back to the platform and start your next day from the platform. And so your model of the world is, here's what the platform is today. Here's what the platform will be in a year. Here's what the platform will be in 5 years. And then by having that, and you could be wrong, it doesn't matter, but you have to have some plan, and then you can adjust it, because if you get input that says, it's not really that way, it's this way, then you adjust. Now, let's make that a little bit bigger. Excuse me. So in this backdrop example, what I'm suggesting is you can do something. For me, I'll tell you what I do. I use Ray Dalio's Changing World Order. Now, if you look that up, you can find it on YouTube. There's two videos that come under that same title. One is a 45-minute video, which is the extended version, and that's good. I would recommend listening to that or watching it. But if you just want to get a taste, there's a 4 minute, 53 second, I think it is, version that's short. You'll get this sense of it. It'll make sense. And what he's talking about is at the micro level. If you go back, and he went back hundreds of years, and he saw that the Chinese empires followed the same thing, but the bulk of the book is talking about how the world order has changed, and he talks about it as superpowers. So this is like an 80-year cycle, basically, and there's 5 stages as you climb to be the top of this, as the superpower emerges, climbs to its peak, and then has a decline. And he said this is repeated over these centuries, and each one is about 80 years, give or take. And then we have where we are right now. So where we are, the United States is has been since 1944. So we're at that 80-year point, the world superpower, and we are probably in stage 5 of 6. So there's 6 stages, and we're definitely on the decline side because we've left 4, so we're in 5, and we're definitely on the decline side. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, but he's looked historically in the past as a good predictor, not the best, but a good predictor of the future, because there's always something that people can do different. And that's how I look at what the United States is doing. So if you think about this as the backdrop, in his book, he talks about the next, the emerging world order. So this is already in play, right? This is the dotted line. That's already in play. What we don't know is what's going to happen. So history would say that China would rise to that next the world superpower. And with the world superpower comes the reserve currency. So if this was the US, this was Great Britain, and this is the Dutch. Now, the Great Britain and the Dutch, they were very much about colonizing. So they have they have their hands on many different countries around the world, and that was the model before. What's different now is that if you look at it from a colonization standpoint, U.S. is big into colonizing and has been, and is call it neo-colonizing, right? Neo-colonialization. And China has not really been a colonial type. They like their hemisphere. They've these all this is was happening in China was internally. It was the empires. They weren't participating in this world superpower. So we don't know where the future is going to go. So using that as a backdrop, we have the U.S. and its 80-year cycle, and we're here. it looks like we're going here, and it looks like China has been rising with their manufacturing, etc. But we don't know what that's going to look like. So I could definitely see a world where China continues and the US does something like that. So rather than go from a unipolar superpower, we end up going to a multipolar unit superpower, a multipolar superpower. And you can see that if you look at during the Dutch, the guild was there. This the well, I'm losing the word. Is guilder? I think was the reserve currency. Great Britain is the pound, sterling, and then with the U.S. has been the U.S. dollar, and that has been the world currency. A lot of it was done with the petrodollar that kind of forced the issue, and that has made the U.S. dollar very sticky because even if it were to get replaced, there's so many countries that work within the U.S. dollar framework. But that's not my purpose to talk about this. I'm just painting a picture of why I have it as a backdrop. I would recommend you going to the Changing World Order videos and making your own decision and choices and coming up with your model. And if this works, then yeah, but make it your words and not mine. And meanwhile, we have the BRICS. So we have the US dollar and we have the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So these countries are coming together with their currency, and there's some tension here between the US dollar and the BRICS. So we don't know what's going to happen, but my model is saying there's going to be a multipolar superpower regardless of what happens. There is major change coming because as the US goes from, so when I was growing up as a boomer, we were rising. All you had to do was show up and you got better. You show up, you're going to get promoted. You show up, you're going to get results. You show up, you make sales. And then it started declining, and we've seen things happen. We've seen the 2008 financial crisis, we've seen the pandemic, and now we're going through this current pressure, especially for the US. And so this decline, and I can see, and then you have cryptocurrency coming in. So there's a lot of moving parts. I'm not going to say I can predict what's going to happen, but I will tell you that regardless, there's going to be a lot of moving parts. And then there's something else that's going on where you have these other countries emerging, right? So you have some of the African countries uh, uh, taking ownership of their resources. You have other countries starting to become players. You look at India, some of the things that are going on with India, and so there's going to be a not only a multipolar, but assuming we don't go into a world war, the the globalized view, the global view, globalization, I think expands. I think it continues to grow. Again, out of scope, but I wanted to point out that I have a model in the back of my mind so that as I navigate on a day-to-day basis, I get up. Do I believe this is still the pattern? Absolutely. If there's a world war, then I would have to adjust my model and adjust my likelihood. But right now, this would be my likelihood that we're rising up. Let's do this. I kind of covered my picture. So this right now would be my likelihood is that somehow the U.S. turns the corner, and then we go into a multipolar view, and there'll probably be two currencies, and then you're also seeing trends back to the gold standard. So moving away from fiat currency to gold standard. So regardless, if you're in business, you have changes coming. If you're waiting for the old way to return, it's not going to happen. And even if it got close, it's not going to look the same. So I encourage you, come up with your own model. You probably already have it. There's another way you could do this. You could look at it from a demographic standpoint and follow what's going on with the baby boomers, right? The baby boomers have been going through these years during the same 80 years, actually, oddly enough, through these same 80 years, and it's shaped things. And now we're looking at Gen Z and Alpha coming along, and they're taking things in a slightly different direction. So there's a lot of tensions there. And you can look at that as a model, whatever it is. And I do both, but the this one is so strong. The 80-year cycle is so strong. It's an economic cycle, and people have to live and eat and breathe. Now, I'm going to let's talk about the stresses that are going on for a minute, because if you were to look at social media and the news, what you're seeing is bad news. What you're seeing is all stuff that gets headlines and gets attention. So there's this constant view of more and more stress. And with that, it's easy to feel you're out of control. So because everything is focused on stress, it's easy to feel like you're out of control. And as I said already, if you go outside and you talk to some other people who are not on social media, they have a completely different experience of the world, unless you're in one of these cities, in one of the areas of these cities where you're getting some of the activity going on, some of the publicized activity. But here's what I would tell you. Go for a walk in the city or in the park and look at the amount of young families out there. Look at the amount of parents with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year olds. Do this on the weekend and you'll see very clearly. Look at what those parents are focused on. They're worried about having their kids having a good time. They're not, for the most part, I'm generalizing, not stressed out. They're not worried about the social media. They're going on about their life. And here's why this is important. If you look at the Great Depression, which was significant, the peak unemployment rate was 29%. So roughly 70% of the people during the Great Depression, I'm talking US now, were still working. The 2008 financial crisis in the United States, the peak unemployment hit 9%. So 90% of the people are still working. Now, I know there's underemployment and you can debate that, but the bigger point is there are still people working. The economy was still functioning, maybe weakly, but it was still functioning. And there were still people paying for services and resources. And that's why people were able to work. And of course, there's regional aspects as well. So when you take this walk on the weekend through a park and you look at all the young families with children, small children, or planning to have children in the midst of raising a family, they're not going to let things get too far, right? They're going to make sure that their babies have food and their babies are in a safe place. And that's where we're not even close to that yet, where these young families are engaging and making sure that their offspring have a good future. So I just tell you that to use it as a way to say, you know what, I don't need to stress out over this because there are many, many layers between where I am and Armageddon. And each one of those layers, I get to make more choices. And that brings us back to right where we are, which is being able to navigate stressful situations and maintaining agency. So let me do this. I'll go through the what I covered this week. So this week I talked about uh, beliefs and how you can change beliefs. And one way to change beliefs is with reframing. And reframing causes some cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is you have two things. I believed this, and now I also believe this, and these two things are in conflict. What happens with the cognitive dissonance? It can cause those to collapse. You can even do the exercise of slowly with your eyes closed and conscious type breathing, bringing your hands together and feeling the tension as you bring these two beliefs together to collapse them. So that would be the cognitive dissonance. The other one that you could do is, as I mentioned, reframing. And you don't just reframe willy nilly just to be reframing. What we're doing is we're moving from convergence to divergence. So you go from convergence, which is where we go, by the way, when we're in fight or flight. We go into this convergence of narrowing down our options, our field of view. And then what we want to do is push out. with divergence. So you look for reframing, but it doesn't have to be reframing. It could just be other examples. I just used one by going out and looking. You're outside, so you're going to have a wider view and looking at something different, which would be the young families and thinking about what they're thinking about. Just imagine what they're thinking about. They're making sure that their children have a safe place to live. So even if things go totally south, you still have these young parents, this pressure, putting pressure on the system, whatever that looks like. This down here, I was talking about the 7-step reset. And step one is your conditioning where you are. Step two is regulation. Three is the conditioned stimulus reaction. Step four would be your response. Five is emotional modulation if you need it to get back to modulated, which is a subset of regulation. So regulation is the broader umbrella, and regulation could be corrective. All of this is about preventive. So the reason I'm doing this is because it's preventive, and that's life is moving too fast to be corrective. We have to be preventive. So we go upstream and we solve things upstream so that when the moment happens, we're already on the right side of it. So that's the emotional modulation. It's 90 seconds. If you can process that emotion in 90 seconds, it doesn't become a thing. And if it doesn't become a thing, you don't have to use those corrective processes that we talk about in emotional intelligence. 6 is action, and 7 is presence or mindfulness, getting back to presence. And this happens over and over and over during the day. So while you may not think about it like this, I want you to keep pushing it out. This is, again, the convergence and divergence. Without doing this, you end up on focusing on step 3, the stimulus reaction cycle. And notice I say reaction, not response, because they're two different things. And you just start spiraling there. But by pushing it out and say, where am I on this 7-step reset? That's just an example. Then we talked about beliefs. I already said that you can change beliefs with convergence and divergence. You can, and creating some cognitive dissonance. And I also talked about using the movie theater techniques where you're watch yourself on the screen as you're growing up to find out where you first came about that limiting belief. And then this picture down here is looking at the table legs as references, and those references, when the references fall, the belief falls. You can go back and look at that video. It's wherever you're watching this, you'll be able to find it. Well, it's not on TikTok, but you'll be able to find it if you go to 7stepreset.com. You'll see the different platforms that I'm on when I do these live events. Then this one looks kind of busy, and it is, but the short version is that if you have a proxy for your purpose, doesn't have to be a full purpose, and you call that 12 o'clock. This is your direction, 12 o'clock. And then you can pivot 30 degrees either way. So I used the example of a clock face. So 3 o'clock would be 90 degrees, and 1 o'clock would be 30 degrees, and 11 o'clock would be 30 degrees. So if you pivot between 11 to 1 and 1 to 11, and you think about it as passion and purpose, so as you pivot, you're keeping those two things in mind. So sometimes you may be biased towards passion, sometimes you may be biased towards purpose. And that was the idea. And you just keep resetting this. And what that enables you to do is you can then take the things that are outside of that. And while you may not be able to go all the way to that level, you may have to go here, but you can certainly say, well, we're not going to do a 180. So this is all in the no zone. And by having a no zone, you are able to reduce the amount of stimulus reaction cycles you go through a day per day, because you're not reacting to everything. Some of this stuff just doesn't matter to you. One, it's not because you're not going to chase it. I'm not going to do this. And you every day you can check off things that you know you're not going to do, and those no longer become important. So that was that model. And then I also did a variation of the Eisenhower matrix where you looked at quadrant 1, 2, I think it's, yeah, 3 and 4. And 1 is important and urgent. 2 is important but not urgent. 3 is not important, not urgent. And 4, I'm sorry, 3 is not important but urgent. And 4 is not important, not urgent. And the way you determine how important something is the impact. What's the adverse impact if I don't do it? Or the benefit if I do? So that's how you can judge what's important. And this gets you out of the urgency trap, because the urgency trap gets you going down, looking at efficiency, and it forces you to start thinking about the threat, seeing the risks. And then this one, I I did the how or what. So it's what you're going to do, and then how you're going to do it. And this an example is profit and revenue. So one of the ways you can slow things down when you're feeling that tension is just go to a two-axis matrix and put the 2 points of tension. You can say growth and profit. You can say efficiency and effectiveness. As I said, revenue, profit, how and what. And you can, just by doing that, you can isolate the two. This is another way of going to divergence. Because remember, if the subconscious or the network of neurons is processing at 11 million bits per second, then you are not having that kind of experience on the conscious mind side, because the conscious mind can only process at 50 bits per second. So just by slowing things down for a second or two, you're cutting out a tremendous amount of data that's coming from the network of neurons. So that's the what I was looking at during the week. And then what I want to do is a summary today, just to kind of touch on the 4 pillars, to orient you to that, and then look at some of the highlights, because it is a model. So I have dynamic leadership. Under dynamic leadership, I have the 7 performance areas. Under the 7 performance areas, I have the 7-step reset, which is how we get to execute on those 7 performance areas. And then the 7-step reset, to gain mastery over that, command and mastery over that, I use the 1 second model, and actually 7 phases of the 1 second model, because that's the stimulus response cycle that happens over and over and over. So I'm going to go through those right now and bring you up to speed. So you can do some screenshots if you want, and you'll see I'm doing a 9 by 16 today. If you want to look at a 16 by 9, you could go to that 7stepreset.com/live. And also you can use this link to join me on stage, and we can have a conversation real time about actual stuff. So the backdrop is, I want you to be thinking about some quest that you're going after. Or if you don't have a quest that makes this more relevant, then think about just dealing with the VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and the just how much overwhelm is going on, and anxiety or anxiousness, and apply it to that. Because the same way we work to get above the line, it's how we have to work to get back to a calm state, or presence, or mindfulness. All right, so let's go here. So dynamic leadership is the umbrella. This comes under dynamic leadership, very much aligned with emotional intelligence. The big difference between what dynamic leadership brings to the emotional intelligence conversation is, this is all about preventive. If you go look at emotional intelligence, because it was developed in the 90s, there's a lot of conversation about hardwired, and personality is set, intelligence is set, those things can't change. So the levers that emotional intelligence uses are mostly corrective, whereas in dynamic leadership, what we're doing is focusing on preventive. And with preventive, obviously, you're going to save yourself time and energy to focus on more important things. But there's 4 pillars of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And a big part of what I do with dynamic intelligence I'm sorry, a big thing that I do with dynamic leadership is to make sure that we're managing our presence so that we're always operating from a place of agency. So no matter what happens, all the chaos, we come back to that moment of agency because we are not in this space that the world is going to fall apart or that the house is burning down. You just don't go there because you recognize that 99% of the threats we're facing are not tiger level threats. They're just inconveniences or maybe difficulties, but they're not existential. We don't need to live in a world where we're going through 65,000 seconds a day of existential threat. You can go weeks and weeks and weeks without having a near tiger level threat, let alone a tiger level one. So that's why self management is important, because if you don't have self management and get regulated, what'll happen is your read on what's going on around you is going to be off, and if that read is off, your relationship management will be off, and this is where we get bad behaviors and toxic environments. In February, I'll be talking more about leadership. So right now, I'm talking about self awareness and self management, and then in February, we'll be talking about leadership more so from a one to one. It's still leading, because if you have a team of 8 people, the way you lead those 8 people is mostly one to one, especially in the beginning. And once you get everybody operating as a unit, then you're moving more into one to many. But you have to lead first one to one, even if you're doing it 10 times, right? One to one 10 times to cover all 10 of your people. And then in March, we'll go into executive level, which is one to many, and that's more about setting climate. So this gets to social awareness, would be the micro view in February, and then relationship management would be the macro view, setting climate, because climate leads to culture, and that's going to be in March. These are the 4 pillars: knowledge, habit mastery, state mastery, and forgiveness. And I put forgiveness in there because after you go through the seven after you go through the 7 performance areas and you have your agency here in the physical, spiritual, and emotional, and things are good. This is on a good day of a good week. You can do it in a controlled environment. You're there. But when you get into other people, relationships can trigger past hurts. You may have had some trauma, little t. This is not mental health. I'm talking about some inconveniences as a child growing up that have kind of caused you to have some buttons that people can push. And these relationships may trigger some things from the past. And next thing you know, you're in fight or flight, not because of what's happening right now, but because some way you're triggered back to that because of an interaction that occurred. That interaction triggered that old feeling. And next thing you know, you're going down a path that you shouldn't be on. And this is the 7 steps. So the seven step reset. Think of one as conditioning. This is where we are. So we've got to constantly be conditioning ourselves so that, today I'm at one level of conditioning, but if you catch me a week and I'm working on some things, I'm going to be better. So we have to keep working on that. That's the beliefs, neuroplasticity, priming, mindset, and physiology. Those are the levers that you can pull to keep pushing on your conditioning. And we talk about that. I do entire segments just on the 7 step reset. And then number 2 is like a check-in to see where we are. Am I using all that I can? Am I showing up as the best version of myself? What's my dashboard say? And then this is where you can apply some of the levers. So these levers that I'm talking about, some you're going to apply here. And this is all pre-stimulus. This is the pre-stimulus side here. Then you have the conditioned reaction step, and then we have the response side. And I'm going to skip this for now, but the main thing here is at the end, after the action, we want to get back to presence. So this presence positions us to show up as the best version of ourselves. If we go from reaction, skip 1 and 2, back into stimulus reaction, skip 4, 5, 6, 7, back into stimulus reaction, you're doing a circle here, and you're spiraling away into high stress mode. And this is the 1 second model. This would be the habit mastery. The 7 step reset is how you get to state mastery. So in 1 second, I call this if you look at neuroscience, the term is pre-listening, but the brain is essentially predicting. I was thinking about this. uh, when people go to the doctor's office, a lot of times the doctor will say, "Oh yeah, well, we normally see people's blood pressure is higher when they come into the doctor's office." I haven't done the research on this, but my guess is that when you're in that environment, the brain is predicting what's probably going to happen. And if you think about going into the doctor's office, most of the time there's some kind of news that comes, and most of the time that news is probably not positive. So the brain is predicting some negative stimulus is going to come, and this is happening before the stimulus, and now you're already primed. So you get news, and you can tell the doctor comes in. Some people, depending on how much presence you have and how much uh, agency you have, some people will already be like tense. You can see them, that they're just stressed out, and because they're expecting bad news. You don't want to be there. We want to manage that pre-listening, and that's why I made that picture of the no zone. Because if you can say these are the things I'm not worried about, these are the things that off the table, I'm not worrying about them happening, then you're going to have fewer and fewer things that'll trigger you, and your brain is predicting fewer and fewer things because the network of neurons, aka subconscious, it's physiological. The neural pathways build with myelin and synapses, and then that makes them more efficient and effective at firing. But that's a process that you can change with deep practice. And what's going through the neurons is not your mind, it's energy. It's energy flowing through the neurons. So that view that the mind is the brain at work, I disagree with that. The mind is the mind. The mind is by itself. The brain at work is the conditioning and the habits. And you'll see, like if you look at uh, Dan Siegel's work, you'll see him pushing on that as well. And the neuroscientists are certainly pushing on it, but their work is in the lab, and their objective is peer reviewed. So they keep going deeper and deeper. And neuroscience is relatively new. If you think about the hunter gatherer, tens of thousands of years old, and we've only really been living in this kind of a world for the last few hundred years, and neuroscience is still under 50 years ago. We were we just started talking about myelin as part of something that improves how the neural pathways fire, just to put that in perspective. So you have your prediction or your pre-listening that's always going on, and so that colors the stimulus that comes in, which is why I want to manage this. I want my pre-listening to be neutral, and we have a process to do that. I won't be able to do it today, but I'll cover it tomorrow, and that's the emotional modulation, because I won't do as much review tomorrow. And then you have your initial detection. So this is the reaction time. There's about a quarter of a second reaction time. So from here to part of this is the initial detection and then the rapid appraisal. And this initial detection is when it's bouncing up against things like priming, cognitive biases, that's coming into play here. So it's not just waiting. The network of neurons is not just waiting for a quarter of a second. It's actually rapidly processing to figure out what is this going on. And here, between here and here, it assigns the meaning. And now we have meaning. And then from here to here, it packages it. It starts packaging it into a reaction. So I've got the meaning, I've got the cognitive biases, I've got the priming, I've got the prediction. Now I am I understand this is the subconscious talking. Here's the reaction I'm recommending. And that reaction, this is a bright line right here, because this side is network of neurons, this side is conscious mind. So as it crosses this line, it goes from a signal that's through the network of neurons into something that the conscious mind can perceive. And once that happens, we go from 11 million bits per second to 50 bits per second. So it slows down. And then the conscious mind, in my 7-step reset, we slow this down too. So the conscious mind can actually assess it, discount the reaction because it's from the past, it's based on past results or past activity, discount that and come up with a logical decision based on what the conscious mind knows, and and then even slowing down the action. So now we have conscious engagement. And this is how you go from fight or flight, because if you don't do this step, the reaction is typically fight and flight, and what we want is focus and engage. Tomorrow, I'll go through the emotional modulation so you can see that we're going to recondition, and we'll do it right in the workshop. You'll be able to do it real time. You'll be able to recondition your bias towards fear. And by doing that, what happens is 80% of the stimuli go from fear based to neutral. And that alone is going to have a dramatic effect on your experience. The next thing I talk about is If you think, and I already covered this a little bit, identity is a construct or a summary, and people perceive it as unchangeable. They don't recognize that it's elements in neurons. So this side is whether or not how much of this is a perception slide, the acceptance of the neurons and elements. So you can see on the when it comes to physical skill, the acceptance view is that yes, I get it. I get that these are a set of habits, and they know that you can do practice and get muscle memory by doing breaking down the activity. Muscle memory is not muscle memory; it's nervous system memory. But this is the same. The way neurons work for physical activity is the same the way neurons work for identity and personality, but the perception of it, the acceptance of it, is way off. So this is why people think these constructs are not changeable. This is why emotional intelligence 35 years ago said that your personality is hardwired, your intelligence is hardwired, but it doesn't have to be, because the same way you use deep practice and drills to change your to build your muscle memory is the same way you can use deep practice and drills to change your identity. This is why this is important, because we're going through a stimulus response cycle thousands of times a day. And if we don't do this step of getting us back to presence, we run the risk of stacking our stimulus response. And we just keep stacking them and overlapping them because that's what the network of neurons does. If you think about it like this, there's only one stimulus, the threat. And when that threat comes in, it's just one, but because the network of neurons takes off and neurons that fire together wire together, and it's looking for more threats, it's going to keep looking for other threats. If it doesn't find what that threat is, because remember, it thinks it's treating that email as a tiger on the Serengeti. So the tiger doesn't keep coming. There's just one email. It's not like a dynamic moving tiger that's coming at you, but you've already triggered this monitoring system to start looking for the threat, and essentially any threat will do. And what it finds is your anxiety inside, your clenched jaw, your clenched fist, your shallow breathing, and it says, "Oh, this is scary," and it keeps looking and looking. That's why we have practices that you can do real time so that you can remove that. Then we talk about the as we go through the seven performance series. The first one's a mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. Then we have relationship, professional, and financial, which I don't deal with at this level because those involve other people, and we first have to get the agency over ourselves. And what we're doing in these four is we want to understand the mind versus the neurons. We want to understand neuroplasticity. That's the physical consciousness, awareness of our awareness, and aware that we're aware, and that we have to get ourselves to take action based on that awareness. So it's one thing to be aware, but it's another thing to go through the door. You go from not knowing there's even a door there to awareness that there's a door to actually awareness and ability to open the door, but then you still have to go through the door. And then we have self-regulation. You have self-regulation, and I say self-regulation is more of an umbrella term because a lot of it is corrective, but we're going to do it with prevention, and that's the modulation, which I'll talk about tomorrow. And then there's the seven performance areas. There's the stack thing, and here is some examples. So I talked about going from convergence to divergence, and when you're in convergence, this is the fight or flight stage. This is the when somebody's triggered, they're going in convergence, and you have to push yourself out to get more to divergence. And the divergence, a way to do that is you go from narrowed attention to wider perception. You're going from narrowed meaning to wider options. And these are some questions you can ask yourself or ask your team. If you're looking at your team and they're going down this convergence, what outcome are you trying to protect right now? The reason people resist this and they want to stay here is because they don't want to lose control. They're feeling like they're they're losing the narrative. They're feeling like they're not going to be able to get their outcome, and all those things trigger this fight or flight. So what outcome are you trying to protect? What would better look like in 10 minutes? People want better, but let's put a label on it. Let's define it. What are two viable options from here? This is different than what I was talking about earlier, but you can also go to the two-axis model. Where's the tension? What's the effectiveness look like? What does efficiency look like? What does important look like? What does urgency look like? and just separate them. And by separating them, you can come up to a better next step or what's a good action to take next. So these next few slides are examples of what you can do. This was done, this is more in the moment. This is what's happening in the seconds while you're feeling it to get back to presence so you don't go down that spiral path. That's what you do real time. This is what you can do to start developing. So this physiological sigh, an extended exhale, and this is real time too. It says 10 to 30 seconds, but you just inhale through the nose. That's a short one, and then you exhale long. I talk about doing breathing exercises on a regular basis so that you can anchor yourself to those, and because breathing is one of the fastest ways to get back to presence. And if you do breathing exercises all the time, it can become an anchor. So instead of just thinking of breathing exercises, you're thinking of breathing exercises as a way to anchor a state. And then where you're in a challenging situation, you just take in a breath and you exhale, and you allow yourself to move into calm. This is another example of the awareness. It's one thing to have the doorway to walk into calm, but you also have to walk through it. That's the part that you have to get yourself to do. And the early catches, you notice a tight chest, shallow breathing. It's that first thing that comes up when you get bad news, or somebody's comes in who always brings in tension. You can feel like that first that first tightening. That's when you do it. You don't wait for it to unfold, because then it becomes a neurobiological event potentially. Emotions take off, and remember, you have 90 seconds to modulate the emotion, so you want to get that done. Posture, reset. Let's make sure this is working. Yeah. Posture, reset, unclench. This is you loosen your hands, you relax your jaw, drop your shoulders back. You can lean back in the chair. Whatever you have to do, and the good news is, remember, the network of neurons side is 11 million bits per second, and it's pounding that through that 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 bright line to turn it into something the conscious mind can perceive, and it's packing in all this threat. By doing these things, you're gaining seconds, and seconds to just start to relax. And then another one would be widen your vision, orient to the room, 5 to 20 seconds. I talk about going look out the window. Sometimes when I'm on the phone, I'll just stand up and walk if I'm feeling like somebody's you know getting too anxious, because I want to get them slowed down, and I have to make sure I'm slowed down. Because I go live every day, so sometimes there's glitches. Yesterday, the main camera went out, and I resolved it by switching over to my backup camera. But the point I made in that example was there was only one glitch. The camera went out. It wasn't like the camera went out and then this thing went out and then this thing went out and that thing went out. One thing went out, and I could deal with that. But if you're not in that space where you have the agency, you're operating from agency, then the next input is from inside, and it's this tension, it's the shallow breathing, it's the anxiousness, it's the concern, is, oh no, what does this look like? And that's where the people spiral. And then we have micro action to regain agency. This is, again, you can do this in the moment. Take a sip of water, stand up, sit back, slow your speech. And I've done all of these. Ask one clarifying question. I was like, let me ask you a question. While I'm saying, let me ask you a question, I'm actually formulating the question, because I can say, let me ask you a question out of habit. I don't have to think to say those words. Meanwhile, I'm formulating. If I'm speaking to a group of people and a tough question, even any kind of question, I said, so the question I'm hearing is, or if I understand the question correctly, or sometimes you're just repeating the question. So like online, you may repeat the question. Yeah. So the question is blah, blah, blah. And while I'm saying that, I'm formulating my response. And usually my response is to get more information, to get some direction. So whatever question, whatever is coming up, I have this model, this view, a mindset that says it's either coming from divergence to convergence, or it's going from convergence to divergence. And I want to know which direction. So I said, well, how does that, let me ask you how you came about that. And when they answer that question, or let me ask you some context for that question. And when they answer that, they're telling me the convergence and the divergence. So that has bought me time. And now my conscious mind is fully engaged, and I'm able to access what I know. Whereas if I let myself go into fight or flight instead of focus and engage, that 5 or 8 seconds has been used up, cycling and cycling and cycling to back to getting more anxiety. And so there's the quick thing you can do. That's the summary. Just release your jaw. So if you're scrolling through social media and something gets your attention, start doing this. Just build a habit. Now, the important thing is, you know, the important thing to recognize is the reason why 95% of our behaviors by habit is because it's the network of neurons driving it. And be- the way neurons work, myelinated neurons work faster and more efficiently, more accurately, and myelinated neurons are the path of least resistance. So the reason habits are the way they are is because the stimulus comes in and the reaction follows the path of least resistance, which is a highly myelinated neural pathway. You can't make this change with knowledge. You have to make the change with execution and practice. So when you start talking about getting from here to there, you have to have a conditioning component in there. You've got to have a development component and a progression component so that you are putting yourself into more and more difficult situations. It's one thing to be able to do this, like on social media. If you watch something, you can put the phone down and then you could release your jaw, exhale fully, drop your shoulders, breathe. That's one thing. But now to do it when somebody's across from you, challenge you on something. Oh, now it's a little bit harder. Or maybe when you have 3 or 4 people yelling in your face, it's going to be harder. So we have to keep upping that until it becomes a habit that happens on a bad day of the bad week. And the reason I use that language is because the driver is let's get to automaticity. And that's where I'll leave it. Now, tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more about these slides and these ideas, but I'll bring in emotional modulation because that's one of the quickest ways to get back to presence and regulation. And it keeps us out of corrective, it keeps us in preventive. All right, we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'll be on at 7 o'clock, 7 a.m. Pacific time.